So hi everyone, it's great to be here. What I'm going to do is deliver a paper about something that really bothers me. So my background is I've got 20 years worth of corporate and entrepreneurial experience, but I've been a minister, a vicar in the Church of England for the last 7 years. And it's always struck me that there's a big disconnect between the ways that I've done things in the past and the way that the church does things now. So that has frustrated me. I did a master's that was supervised by Will that started me thinking about this connection. How do we properly and well connect the way that the business world thinks with theology? So this paper is an attempt, I suppose, to start to broaden that discussion about how can we think about business practices more generally in a way that is also theologically appropriate as well. So you can hear it and then tell me what you think. The established church is in a crisis of anxiety, identity and direction. There's a reshaping of ministry patterns and the expectations placed on clergy and congregations. This has resulted in a polarization of perspectives and approaches. On the one hand, either uncritical utilization of business strategy, or on the other, an appeal to tradition and claims of managerialism. And so in this paper, I explore how institutional change could be enacted and embodied, and doing that imaginatively through an interdisciplinary conversation between aspects of Otto Scharmer's theory U and Jürgen Moltmann's ecological doctrine of creation. And I'm going to do that from a transversal post-foundationalist perspective, but don't worry, because I'm going to explain what that means. So I've been having quite a lot of fun with ChatGPT, trying to get it to think about how post-foundational transversality. This is the best it could come up with this morning, which is this idea that there's different bits of overlaps, different sources of knowledge. So what does this look like? Well, we can imagine what I'm trying to do as a conversation that takes place downwards, upwards, and across between disciplines. And what I want to focus on are the overlaps and divergences of these two perspectives, whilst preserving the integrity of the theological. So those big words that I use, transversal reasoning, that's a way of thinking that maintains the distinctiveness of each perspective, but it creates a third space for the conversation to happen where different voices need not always be in contradiction or in danger of assimilating one another, but are in fact dynamically interactive with one another. And then the second big word, post-foundational, that perspective asserts that there's not one universal source of truth, but it acknowledges that human knowledge is provisional. It consists of social practices, of language, of values that are local and contextual. And so to be post-foundational requires a specific focus on a shared issue where the conversation is between contextually relevant voices to highlight those overlapping concerns and to identify shared problems. We don't need to despair too much. The church is not alone in identifying a disconnect between the present reality and an uncertain future. It's a common experience that we see day to day, isn't it? Shared in healthcare, in education, in politics and government. We're particularly going through that right now, thanks to Mr. Trump. And Scharmer, who came up with the theory U that I'm going to be talking about, he says that in any organization, there's a stasis in understanding the world and in activity, that the two things appear to be deeply frozen and unchanged are our collective habits of thought and the actions that they produce. And so what I want to do through the next few minutes is a thought experiment, investigation into how business practice could be developed into a useful approach to help the church reimagine itself by drawing on a specific change management theory and applying it to the discernment of worship and mission. And so in my role as a church leader, I can't ever operate in purely a theological mode. And I often think back to my business career and how we used to problem solve and how we used to innovate. And that's why the title of this talk comes from. The whiteboard was always our friend. By drawing on it, by describing things visually, we could look at something objectively and also creatively. So my interest in this is to ask how business thinking can be applied theologically to help the church flourish. What would it look like for the church to be theological and true to its heritage, whilst learning from and adapting other perspectives and ways of thinking? And I think that interdisciplinarity is the key perspective to develop this way of thinking. And so the conversation partners are Theory U, a management theory of change developed by Otto Scharmer, and others that focus on hidden human processes where attention is paid to a problem. It looks like that. I don't have time to explain it, but we can talk about it afterwards if you like. But I think that this is, it's called Theory U because it's a U-shaped thing that goes down and then comes back up again. And I think that this is an interesting dialogue partner with theology because it has wider application than purely just in the corporate world. He claims that Theory U has global application, and he makes the bold claim that change makers in all sectors, cultures and systems, including business, government, civil society, media, academia and local committees, and I'll add the church, can apply Theory U to discover future possibilities. So in my search for a theological voice that considers future possibilities, it's what Theory U does. I've come across Jürgen Moltmann's God in Creation. He has theological ideas in that resonate with the principles of Theory U. So while he asserts that there's no distinction between the immanent and the transcendent, so there isn't an idea that there's like parallel worlds, but everything can happen in our own time and place. And in this book, in his ecological doctrine of God in Creation, he asserts that there needs to be a new way of thinking about God, no longer making a distinction between God and the world as two separate things, but instead recognizing the presence of God in the world and the presence of the world in God. And he supports his argument from a Trinitarian perspective, arguing that God is present in the world, which is what we mean by immanent, through the Holy Spirit, and also simultaneously transcendent, separate from us. So in my reading and my research, I discern three areas of overlap between Scharmer and Moltmann. They are emerging future, time, and resistance. So I'm glad that there's a tree on there, given the theme of everything else that's been talked about so far. So the emerging future, things in the future do not have to be the same as they are now. Try telling that to your PCCs. The church has got no capacity, has the capacity, as the church, we have the capacity to imagine a different future if we choose to, and we're not necessarily constrained by past experience or patterns. In Theory U, the future emerges at the bottom of that U in the presencing phase. And the idea for presencing came from Scharmer's observations in the field that new things could only emerge if the past was let go, so that an organisation can connect with and learn from emerging future possibilities. And on this idea of emerging future, Moltmann uses the idea of parable, of saying that parable is both the present, but it also talks to the yet to come. It's a promise of God that the transcendent and the immanent will meet to reveal something new. He says it's the hidden presence of the future. The second theme that I found as an overlap is the theme of time. Doesn't want to show. You flick it's on the, it's okay. So, related to the idea of emerging future is how humans experience time. Both Moltmann and Scharmer propose that time can be experienced in other ways than in linear time, the time of future, present, and past. And so perhaps by changing our understanding of time, the church can either slow down and notice what God is doing in our communities, and perhaps by slowing down, we can also see differently, or at least to understand how the future unfolds in a different way. When Sharma thinks about time, he shapes that U arrow with that U shape has an arrow at the end. You might have noticed that. We can go back to that later. That represents for him both linear Western time and cyclical Eastern concepts of time. In his explanation of presencing, he recounts two experiences of time slowing down in the presence of other people. He says, "We've become a community and we're totally present to one another. Time slowed down, loving energy radiated through the entire group. And at these moments," he says, "when time slowed down, space seemed to open up." And Moltmann as well also challenges that linear concept of time, but he affirms its universal presence. He says this: "Everything that happens, happens in time. What is now, what is in the past, not yet, and will one day be no more. But does not time itself remain in the becoming of things and their passing away?" And what Jürgen Moltmann does is propose a Christocentric messianic understanding of time, where Christians, where followers of Christ experience time eschatologically, replacing a linear perspective that's not determined by the past, but by looking for what is to come. He says this: "The present time of believers is no longer determined by the past. It takes a definition from the future. The believer's present is free from the past and open for the future of the Messiah." The third theme that I discerned is that of resistance, the observation that people will resist change and do not always want to see differently. Sharma identifies this as absencing on his scheme, portraying it as the inverted U, which is the negative emotions. We've been talking about shadow side, haven't we, through Helen's talk. So the inverted U, which is the negative emotions of those things that, such as ignorance, hate, and fear, things that lead to disconnect from the world that is emerging. And he says that the posture of absencing sticks to patterns of the past. He says, "We refuse to let go of what worked in the past but no longer does, and denies the potential of something different to come." The inverted U, the upside down U of absencing, doesn't dare to lean into the unknown and the emerging future. Moltmann argues that humans anticipate the future either positively or negatively, whether through their fear of something terrible or through their hope for happiness. Embrace or aversion of the future for Moltmann is a spiritual matter. It's symbolic of our understanding of eschatology. Do we believe and therefore act in the hope and promise of Christ's return? Or do we diminish or deny that possibility and therefore fear what is to come? Moltmann says it like this: "We always combine anticipation and extrapolation in a single act because we link what we hope for or fear with what we consider possible and achievable." So in all of this, there is one significant thing, and that is the source. Where does all this come from? That's the final point before I come to my conclusions. If you could put the next slide up, please. As I said at the start, Moltmann's theology of creation is deeply Trinitarian. He describes it as a Trinitarian process. The Father creates through the Son in the Holy Spirit. The created world is therefore created by God, formed through God, and exists in God. Moltmann places a strong emphasis on the person of the Holy Spirit in the act of creation and as God's presence in the world. He summarizes this as an understanding of the world in God and sustained by God's Spirit. In contrast, Sharma's theory U places an emphasis on the power of human interaction in discerning what is to come and its fragmentary nature, in contrast to Moltmann's eternally present Holy Spirit. he describes presencing in terms of experiencing our highest future potential at special moments. He also describes the sort of duality that as individuals and as communities, we are not one but two, the current self and the dormant self that are connected through the process of presencing. Sharma obliquely mentions the spiritual realm. He refers to a sense of power outside and separate from human beings, saying that we find our real power and deep connection from an external source that, in his words, includes God, Christ, the Holy Spirit, in brackets, Christian traditions. That's the extent of his theology. And he conflates that with other spiritual traditions that have a sense of an external source of wisdom or guidance, which he groups together as the same fundamental level of experience, and which describe a deeper state of being than that can become present within us and through us, both individually and collectively. It is possible to both imagine a future that is different from the past, but also for it to become reality, either by thinking it into being or by seeking God's will for something different. In Sharma's scheme, presencing is often a group experience, could be described as spiritual, in which the boundary between me and my dialogue partners, he says, is now wide open. It feels as if something is blessing the communal presence. Moltmann's proposals rely on the spiritual being able to sense his call through prayer, as well as acting with kingdom values with meaningful agency and responsibility. On the theme of time, how might the church understand time in a different way, both eschatologically or even to experience it in a non-linear way, to dwell too on the sensation of liminal holy moments, or simply to pause and to be present, to receive time as a gift and to recognize divine action. Both of these perspectives also affirm that the future is not fixed, that there are alternative futures, things that are available that can be collectively discerned and imagined. The church might want to pursue that thought, particularly with the current narrative of decline in mainstream Protestant denominations. It should ask itself the question, is what we currently expect to happen the only possible future for us as part of the Christian church? Or does God have other plans for us that we should seek to discern? And on that theme of resistance, both perspectives acknowledge that there are multiple reasons why the future is either to be feared or denied. Perhaps a sense of the inevitable to be a church in decline and not to embrace God in the present, or because those in leadership positions are resisting the erosion and disappearance of a social structure that until now has been a constant presence. And both of those perspectives of Moltmann and Sharma, they emphasize the false dichotomy of duality, of distinguishing between the sacred and the secular, between the immanent and the transcendent. Moltmann's emphasis on the role of the Holy Spirit, and even Sharma's nod to an external source of power and wisdom, is a reminder to the church that God is present, active, and concerned for both the world and the church. 2 more paragraphs, I'm done. Imagining a transversal post-foundational conversation between Moltmann and Sharma, I think, generates insights for us that could be then used for further theological reflection on a specific issue. I've highlighted some of those areas of overlap between the two: the experience of time, sensing and seeing the emerging future, and the possibility of resistance to imagining the new, that all merit further reflection. And I think as well that this exercise is also a starting point for a more detailed and focused interdisciplinary work. The good, the luminous, the holy, they can be discerned from perspectives other than the theological. The perceived binary between the immanent and transcendent, and even between the church and business, I would argue, is a false dichotomy, that the church can humbly learn from other perspectives whilst maintaining its theological integrity and developing processes for much needed change.